Queen Elizabeth I ruled from 1558 to 1603. This time period was called the Elizabethan Age, or the English Renaissance. During this time, music, literature, theater, and other arts flourished and were supported by many nobility, including the Queen herself. Queen Elizabeth was Anglican, like her father Henry VIII. However, before her Mary I ruled, and she was Catholic. There was not much freedom of press or speech in Elizabethan England, as the Queen could make monopolies on printing, limiting who was legally allowed to print books and music. And in the theater, censorship was common, as the plays would get edited before they went on stage to stop sedition. Because of these limitations, artists, writers, and composers couldn't express their beliefs outright, so they had to use other techniques to indirectly show their political, religious, and other beliefs. William Shakespeare used metaphors and his own characters to represent ideas of English society, and sometimes mocked the nobility in a way that his audiences would understand, so as not to get his plays censored and receive harsh punishment. Shakespeare often used fairies to represent the nobility and paralleled the fairy world to English society.
His mother was a vulturess of my order, and sat with me on Neptune's yellow sands, marking the embarked traitors on the flood, which she would imitate and sail upon the land, to fetch me trifles and return again, as from a voyage rich with merchandise.
In this speech by Titania, Queen of the Fairies, from A Midsummer Night's Dream, Titania explains about the trading in ships that set off and brought back goods. This can be paralleled to the Elizabethan world, as the play was written during the time of exploration. Shakespeare might have been expressing his beliefs that this trading was positive, as it brought back goods and luxuries for the people. Shakespeare also used characters to represent current events. He represented an ugly suitor of Queen Elizabeth's named Simier by Bottom in Midsummer Night's Dream, and Queen Elizabeth by Titania. It was meant to be a mockery of Queen Elizabeth falling in love with someone that all the people, including William Shakespeare, thought was funny.
Oh, then I see Queen Mab hath been with you. She is the fairies' midwife, and she comes in shape no bigger than an agate stone. Her chariot is an empty hazelnut, made by the joiner squirrel, or old grub. Time out, oh mind, the fairies' coachmakers. O lawyers' fingers who straight dream on fees, or ladies' lips who straight on kisses dream.
In Romeo and Juliet, the description of Queen Mab and her fancy chariot show the wealth and power of the fairy society, which paralleled Elizabethan nobility and their extravagant wealth. These examples from Shakespeare's plays show how he used his characters to parallel the world he lived in his work. The painter Nicholas Hilliard specialized in miniature portraits about 2 to 3 inches tall. However, these portraits were extremely detailed. They were meant to be kept close and only shown to a few people, and not displayed like a life-size portrait was. Hilliard did not show his own beliefs as much in his work as much as the beliefs of Elizabethan nobility as a whole. Because the portraits were so intricate and showed so many details of fancy hairstyles and jewelry, this shows that the Elizabethan nobility were very wealthy, as they could afford such rich jewels. The jewels were probably made by mixing layers of paint and other materials like turpentine and metal powders and applying it with a pin or needle. The nobility who Hilliard painted often didn't want their portraits to look exactly realistic, as they wanted themselves to look better and prettier than reality. This shows the society's belief that people had to look perfect, and their paintings reflected this. This also showed the nobility's power. If they had the power to control their appearance in portraits, then they obviously had a lot of power in real life. One good example of this is Queen Elizabeth's portrait, which was made by Hilliard. She is an imposing, powerful-looking figure draped in jewels. Queen Elizabeth did not exactly look like this, as she used her power to always have herself look better in paintings than in real life, just like many other nobility painted by Hilliard. William Byrd was a composer, a Catholic one in a Protestant court. For most people this would have been unsafe, as Catholics were not extremely liked during Queen Elizabeth's Protestant rule. However, Queen Elizabeth liked Byrd and made him the court composer and musician along with Thomas Tallis. For 21 years, Queen Elizabeth had a monopoly put on all the printing of music in England. This meant only Tallis and Byrd could publish music legally. This was an example that shows how there was little freedom of press and speech. Only the few that were acknowledged by Queen Elizabeth were allowed to print music and other works. William Byrd rebelled against the Protestant Church in a clever way. He wrote many of his pieces in Latin, which most people would not understand. William Byrd went against the Anglicans by protesting an execution of 3 Jesuits by writing a piece of music about this. William Byrd used his music in the Latin language to express his beliefs, even when his people were not totally accepted in England at the time. John Foxe was a Protestant writer in Queen Mary's time who decided to expose these executions in his book, which is now called John Foxe's Book of Martyrs. This book is an example of how John Foxe was brave enough to create this book about Christian martyrs, even though he was exiled for being Protestant and these people were being executed. Once Queen Elizabeth came into power, the book became very popular because now their ruler and many people were Protestant and were free. The book includes very detailed illustrations showing many of the various executions and even includes some names of the martyrs. The book does not only apply to the Protestant executions in Mary's time. Once Queen Elizabeth came to power, people were still being executed, and this book can be shown as an example of how people stood up against the wrongdoing of their leader and tried to make a difference by exposing the things they were doing. This is one example of a person who expressed their beliefs outright and eventually succeeded, despite his exile during Mary's rule. The English Renaissance was a time when all sorts of arts and music flourished. Queen Elizabeth supported many of these arts and gave special permission to certain people who she especially liked. However, England was not a totally free country, as during both Mary and Elizabeth's rule, people who opposed the Queen's religion were executed or exiled. Writers, playwrights, artists, and musicians turned to other techniques to express their ideas. Shakespeare used metaphors, Byrd his Latin music, Hilliard his intricate miniatures, and Foxe bravely used his book. By using various techniques, these people could express their beliefs and escape punishment.